Here at All for Women's Football, we like to try and engage in positive conversations, bringing you the best of women's football in the most light-hearted way. However, it's hard to overlook the last few days and weeks. We've lost a well-respected, once WSL competing team. Two sides have lost their captains for free. The chairman of one WSL side has spoken about how their women's team is TBC, and one team overseas has signed a player on the request of her boyfriend. It's prompted an uncomfortable, pretty blunt question. Are clubs already bored of women's football? Let's find out. Hello, that was such a really sad way to start a show. And I feel like I need to clarify this early. This is pretty much England chat. I'd like to touch on Juve at the end if we get some time, but for the most part, we're going to talk about England. But hello, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, this is going to be a really interesting show. I think I'm interested to hear what the panel has got to say. I'm interested what you guys have got to say. So please do get involved because I think this is a really big, huge topic that we need to talk about. But as I introduce and say hello to my lovely friends and panel here, I'd like you guys to just answer for me. Just give me your thoughts on just women's football over the last couple of days and weeks because it's been a really, really crazy space. We'll start with Jess.
Yes, mixed. Obviously, as a United fan, definitely more mixed. Potentially more negative than positive. But I think what is being shown in the media and what we are seeing and what we will talk about more tonight is kind of shows that maybe the women's game isn't as far as we like to think it is. However, one thing I will say is the fact that this is being brought to attention more than it ever has in previous seasons is overall more of a positive thing. You know, these sorts of stories would have been present 3, 4, 5 years ago and no one would have cared. So the fact that we're voicing them now, talking about them now, and there's a conversation around them does show overall growth.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way to think about it because it is a really uncomfortable topic. Meg, what's your opinions on it?
I mean, just as Jess said, obviously it's been mainly negative news in the past, week or so. With so many different teams involved, different aspects of the game involved as well, whether that's players, managers, boards, etc., etc. And it's just, it makes you think. You look at the highs of, for example, the women's Euros and how much that's done for the game, and then this kind of almost brings you back down to earth as to kind of maybe where we are in the women's game. But as Jess said, a few years ago, these things would hardly have been brought to light. And the fact that they're being brought to light enough that we're able to talk about it is absolutely brilliant. And hopefully, yes, it's been so negative, but hopefully talking about it, will make more people listen and things will hopefully change and get better.
Yeah, Barry, finish us off with this bit. I'm interested to know what you think, sort of, because there has been so much probably since the transfer window's opened, and that's a couple of days ago. So, what's your opinions on it all?
I quite agree with what TJ said. It's very interesting to see a bit of a positive spin there from both Jess and Meg. I think it's a really tricky one because I feel like if I answer the question, I'm going to answer any questions you've got that are forthcoming also as well. So I shall keep this pretty brief, really, insofar as obviously the fact it's come out as news is, I think, very important. I think for me, what it does is it highlights where we are within women's football. And I think that's been really important because there's been a lot of call for expansion, growth, all of these sorts of things. And I think what it does do is just help us to just take stock actually, and to sit there and realise, look, this is where we are, and that actually we need to consider more how we move into the next stratosphere, because the eyes are there. People are watching it now. People are interested, and there is certainly a fan base there that can be catered for. But equally, that there's going to have to be some sort of, not rules necessarily, but there's going to have to be some form of restitution or some sort of way in which this gets properly professionalized, I think.
Definitely. I think that was nice. I didn't expect the positivity to come through so soon, which is nice. And obviously when things like this happen, and we will talk about Reading first because arguably that's the biggest talking point so far this week, is this is the first club post Euros, post this big boom of popularity, that have just not sort of grown with the game. And we'll delve into why that is, but I just want to sort of give some context around Reading first, because those fans who did sort of pick up women's football post Euros might not know just quite how influential Reading have been over the last few years. They've always given a great battle in the WSL. They've never won it, but they've always held their own. And for example, 17-18 season, they come 4th, 18-19th, they come 5th, 19-20, they come 5th, 2021, they come 7th. That was the expansion year when they expanded the league to 12 teams from 10. 2021-22, they came 8th. And then, of course, 2022 to 2023, they came 12th. So they've always been, for the majority of their time in the WSL, that mid-table fighting sort of, they'd pull out a couple of great results against Man City and some of the big teams, and it's such a shame just to watch that decline. And I wrote down here, you have to feel for Kelly Chambers, someone who put 10 years into Reading, as she left that club as the head coach and the director of women's football. It feels like to me that they didn't ever really replace that influence that she had. And when you build something so much like that, it is hard to find a replacement. So Jess, what's your opinions on Reading specifically, and what they've done, where they've come from, and sort of how sour it's ended up?
Well, funnily enough, before the show, I was actually, and it's still on a tab on my laptop, I was just sat on the Wikipedia page, so we'll take everything with a pinch of salt, for the Reading owner, Dai Yonji, I don't know how you pronounce his name, apologies. However, based on what I've just read, do you know what, mate? No apologies. Because his section on football is just an absolute shambles. Like, I have to admit, I did not realise what a mess it is. And that's not just focusing on the women, that's just as a football club. Like, he basically has not paid anyone on time for years. And do you know, after reading that, who I'm actually most furious at in all of this, the governing bodies, like, this has been going on for 3 years maybe now. At what point does the FA or whoever take a look and go, oh, do you know what? We keep fining this bloke, we keep giving them point deductions, and nothing is changing. Not a single thing. Like, he was supposed to pay players, deadlines were passed, like, and they just didn't do anything. They're kind of sticking with 20 grand fines, 30 grand fines, but nothing changed, and it's still in the exact same state. Basically, they're trying to sell off their training facilities. He said that he's trying to sell the club, but it seems really unlikely. What has happened is they've basically let some random bloke buy the club who has no interest in football whatsoever, and he's probably not actually paying any attention to what's going on. And for me, it's never really made sense in other teams as well. You know, teams like obviously Bolton, I think Macclesfield, Rochdale, they kind of fell into financial difficulties. It's never really made sense to me why the teams then get points deduction, because it seems counterproductive. I know that's kind of like a wider conversation, but it just seems counterproductive, because one of the ways that teams can make money is by finishing higher in competitions. So we've got to be placing, and by we I mean like the FA, governing bodies, whoever, got to be placing tighter sanctions on the owners, because the owners aren't particularly getting grief from this. It's the players, it's the fans, it's the backroom staff that are losing their jobs. You know, the owners with their millions or billions are just, what's 50 grand? They probably don't even notice. They're probably not even, it's not even in their stratosphere. They've got PAs and PAs with PAs to deal with all this. So I can't remember what the original question was, to be honest. I think I've gone on a bit of a rant, but it's just insane to me. Like, it's got to be the governing bodies have got to step in at a much earlier point. You know, he was given deadlines, which he didn't hit. And for me, okay, say you have 2 deadlines, that's it. After that, you're done. You know, anyone else in their business, if they keep missing deadlines, they're gonna essentially get fired. Now I understand that he is the owner, but then we've got to look at how we are structuring ownership of clubs, whether things need to be put on like the public kind of exchange rather than having private owners. I don't know the answer to that one. Or the FA have got to retain some kind of control, you know, have it written in the contract that if you do not achieve X, Y, and Z, literally just paying your players, like the bare minimum, just paying your players, paying your staff. If you do not do this, like, what can the FA do to then step in and fix it before we get to the situation we're in now? Because for Reading to be pulled out and essentially grassroots now is insane, considering they were in the WSL the season before last. And like you said, Mia, they've always been, you know, in and around the middle. They've had some fantastic like players linked to them. Obviously, Farrah Williams is probably the most notable one recently. Kelly Chambers, like we've already mentioned, spent a lot of time there. Before her, I think Jane Ludlow was there. You know, these are like big names associated with the club. We're not talking about some tiny little kind of tin pot team. We're talking about, in English women's football, one of the top teams, essentially. So for all of this to happen, it's unbelievable. And I just hope that someone is looking at this so that, and thinking, right, well, okay, we've ballsed up here essentially, but how do we make sure that this never happens again? Because yeah, basically the women's side is always going to be the first one to get cut when they're in a pickle like they are.
Yeah, Meg, I'll let you sort of expand on that, because there was a lot of points there brought up that are absolutely valid and do need asking. Obviously, ownership is massive in football clubs, and they do decide what happens. They decide the future. So I guess following on from Jess, this is going to sound really blunt, and I'm going to ask Barry the same question. Is it easy to brush off the women's side when it comes to finances?
No, I don't think so. Like, obviously, you see how Reading, the men are now struggling as well as the women. But you look at teams, for example, like, I'm going to use Arsenal as an example because, you know, as a women's team, they're, you know, a perfect example to use for a lot of things. The men's team have taken them on board so well. And like, you know, the Emirates is their home for next season, technically. And then you look at the Reading situation and you think the difference, like, it's like you can't even put it on a scale how different women's teams are treated, you know. And there's only one league between, you know, the WSL and the Championship. And as Jess was alluding to, Reading have been in the WSL for so long, and you know, they've not always finished bottom. They've, you know, finished 4th and 5th, and I think that has helped, you know, them gain this sort of, you know, media attention from what's been happening. Because I feel like if it was another club in the Championship, maybe that, you know, have never been in the WSL or something like that, I feel like they wouldn't have the eyes on them at the minute if, you know, they were in the same situation, which is obviously, it's awful that it's happening anyway. But it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, ownership, obviously, it's so, you look at ownership across, you know, all teams, whether it's women's and men's, and you realize how much of an impact a good ownership or a bad ownership has. A lot of fans, you know, may never look at like ownership. They may just look at, you know, we're playing good on the pitch or we're playing shit on the pitch. You know, that's essentially what it comes down to. But it is so much more than that. And as Jess said, like the governing bodies, they have so much power. So why do these situations, occur when these governing bodies like the FA should have the power to step in before it's too late? I mean, the fact that Reading have had to apply to go into tier 5, it honestly baffles me. Like tier 5 is where Grimsby women have just dropped down from after being in tier 5 last season. Like, and the difference between the championship and tier 5 in women's football is there's such a big difference. Like, tier 5 is, you play on a Sunday, you have another job essentially, and, you don't get paid. It just baffles me that a once full-time club are now, just struggling, and, who knows what the future holds. And that kind of brings it back to your question of, are people bored of women's clubs? Like, people think, oh, Reading were in the WSL, they maybe achieved what they made out to achieve as a club. So the fact that they're, now here is like, oh, whatever sort of thing. And people may see it like that. And that's what makes it so awful.
Barry, how in the space of a few years can you have players such as Farrah Williams, Jess Fishlock, Maz Pacheco, Jade Moore? You have a head coach that's so passionate about the game, so all of a sudden, not essentially being a club, you play your football, a lot of your football at the club stadium, at the men's stadium, and now, as Meg said, you're playing against Grimsby in tier 5, and that's no disrespect to Grimsby. That's just a shock on Reading's part that you're in the WSL and then you're not.
This is unfortunately a much deeper question than perhaps we usually go into, I feel. And there are, I'm afraid, some fairly hard truths within this for where we are that may not be popular amongst a lot of people, but doesn't make them any the less true. I think the first thing that we need to consider here within all of this is the demands on the club. They're not a rule as such, but if you think about these clubs 4 years ago, just before the Euros, whilst there was still eyes on the women's game, even up to, even at 2018, even before then, there were eyes on women's football. There wasn't as many. So the demands on things like grounds, the demands on things like wages, the demands on the overheads and all of those sorts of things just weren't there. It's the fact that we've had a couple of seasons where people are celebrating the women using the Emirates, Old Trafford, all of the traditional men's home stadiums. The fact that we've got all of those conversations happening shows that women's football could be played effectively just about anywhere. It wasn't high on their agenda. But with the sudden explosion of talent, the fact that the Lionesses won the Euros and then made it to a semi-final in the World Cup, all of a sudden that interest, certainly domestically, has just absolutely grown. And it's grown so quickly that the boards and the staff are going to take a while for a lot of them to catch up with that level. You asked a question earlier on, is it too easy to take the women's side away? Well, yes, but it depends on who your team is. Like, there are ridiculous noises at the moment going around clubs like Manchester United that, I wouldn't be surprised if they get rid of the women's team. Couldn't happen. It couldn't happen now. You could do that in 2001 because most people weren't even aware there was a women's team. And I'm going to put my hand up there. I didn't even know it had shut because I didn't even know it was there. Like, that's how much exposure the women's game got. So I didn't have a clue. So when I found out we'd put one in 2018 and I found out that 17 years ago we dropped it, I was like, really? Like, where was that? Why did I never know about this? How come I knew about the soccer sevens that were being played on Sky Sports at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, where, full of people that were 60 years old, but I didn't know anything about this. So that's your first thing. I think the demands on the clubs are a lot higher than they were 4 or 5 years ago, which naturally means there is going to need to be some additional money put into the game, which then leads you into the question of where does the money come from? Now, the simple facts of the matter is that if we want women's football to be successful, eventually it's going to have to be successful by itself. It cannot just keep on having money being pumped in from other places. But I do think there is a very real and fair point to be made about the fact that women's football was not allowed for 50 years. They are, the game is starting from such a reduced position compared to the men that it's just not fair. And they can't be expected, these teams, to just do well without having some form of stable ground for them to be able to do this. Now, there's a lot of ways that can happen. That can come through ground sharing, that can come through regular funding, much like we do with grassroots football in the men's game. There's a certain sort of solidarity package that comes down, and granted, it may not be a huge amount of money as it's going through the rest of the 92, but the money is certainly shared. And the situation we're in at the moment is that not every club has to finance their women's team. There is no rule that says they must do something. There almost needs to be reparations paid, a guaranteed sort of thing, whether that be 10% of a club's income or something like that must go towards the women for the next 5 years, just to ensure that clubs can budget over those 10 years and go, do you know what, there's 10 years, working on these current projections, this is how much money we'll get over those 10 years, and you can cut your cloth accordingly. I think that the situation that Reading found themselves in was incredibly unfair for them. But equally, there's absolutely no rule that says you can't do it. Now, we've seen men's teams go bust. Bury, for example, were a very big recent one. Oldham, I think, struggled as well. So I do think there is also an element there of it's not just confined to the ladies, but where it is confined to is just shoddy ownership, as Jess pointed out earlier on. And actually, it's about the owners maybe taking on a slightly better role. And where you come to with that is you then got the Premier League and you've got this new company that's coming out called Nuco. Standing for new company. They really thought that one through. Must have taken them hours. But as those guys sit there and start thinking about it, how are we going to have, it's like having that greater conversation between the two. The Premier League are going to be under no, they don't have to pay the money out to the WSL teams, just like there's no law that says they need to be together on that. So as a result, that's why you end up with clubs like London City Lionesses and all of those sorts of things. So you don't necessarily have a one club situation. What I find really interesting, though, is we talk about Reading. They're not a Premier League side. They have been a WSL side. They've had all of that. When you look at your Premier League sides, it is quite interesting that every single team that's going to be in the WSL this season also has a Premier League club. Every single one, all 12. When you start looking at the rest of those Premier League clubs, though, it gets quite interesting because you've got Sheffield United, Southampton and Newcastle being the other three teams that have a club in the Championship. Newcastle, a bit of a success story, but then granted, they have thrown a reasonable wedge at it. You've got Southampton, who've obviously been there or thereabouts over the last couple of seasons, and Sheffield United as well. So you're looking at 15 clubs there that are making up part of the 24. What worries me is when you look at clubs like Ipswich, Bournemouth, Fulham, Brentford, and then prior to that, Luton and Burnley. Where are their women's teams? So the next thing, and I suppose the easiest way to do it, is to look at, you can't just turn around to every single club in the men's division and just go, right, you've got to start paying your women's team some money, because some of them are only just getting by as it is. So I would be more inclined currently to be considering what the Premier League clubs are going to do. And I think there needs to be an element of the Premier League putting money into women's football, because that's where the bulk of the money is. It's pointless asking clubs in the Championship, League 1, League 2 to be putting money towards it, because they don't get enough anyway. They're still sitting at the same table that the women's team is at, going, can we have some money, please? You seem to have it all. So we're in exactly the same situation. I think the Premier League needs to put more money into it. I think they need to get rid of the FA Cup money for the men. I said this last season. Just get rid of it. They don't need it. There's not a single men's team that is getting to the FA Cup final and going, oh, good, that £5 million is really going to help. It's not. Just put that straight back into the women's game. The men don't need it. They can just have the glory of winning the FA Cup. That's all they need. And if they're not fussed about just winning the FA Cup, then we'll see some other teams do well and get to the final, won't we? So I think there needs to be an element of that. But I also think that there should also be an argument like we used to have with stadiums. Maybe you can't be in the Premier League unless you've got a women's team that is running with an academy and all of those sorts of things. Then all of a sudden, these teams are going to start thinking, well, do you know what? Even if we are at tier 5, and credit to Reading, they still kept a women's team. They could have just gone, well, we'll just get rid of it all entirely and there's no such thing anymore. So they've tried to cut their cloth and go, what's going to be the cheapest option for us? So I know I've rambled a bit there, but I hope that's answered your question.
No, that was brilliant. Thank you. Absolutely. You got the whole rundown there of the Reading situation. But Barry, you did mention it, and there's a great conversation going on in the chat at the minute, so it's completely wrong of us not to mention it. And on the flip side, as one club leaves the championship, another one is putting a hell of a lot of money into their club. Of course, London City Lionesses. Now, let me have a look here. Now, obviously, a couple of days ago, last week, maybe, I don't know, relatively recently, Michelle Kang, who is the owner of London City Lionesses, really sort of tried to drum up some interest. I know we got a couple of media invites to come and see. We didn't hear any more than that. It was very sort of mysterious. What are they going to do? What are they going to announce? And I think most of the media knew that she was planning on moving stadiums, and that they did announce that they're moving from Dartford to Bromley, I think. Anyway, they're moving stadiums, so that's a big move for them. They also have a new manager. I won't even pronounce his name. He formerly was of PSG. Huge coup for them in championship sort of level. They had a rough season last season, London City Lionesses. So yeah, massive for them. And then of course they signed former AC Milan player I'm going to butcher her name as well, Kosovare Asllani from Sweden, who is a former Champions League playing player, an essential part of the Swedish setup. Swedes obviously brilliant at the football. So they're 3 huge announcements. She's put a lot of money into this, but the question really is, the flip side, is throwing money at clubs the answer to growing football? There has to be, surely, some middle ground, because with this and London City Lionesses next year, you're going to see, and I think Newcastle as well, you're going to see such a divide with teams like Durham, who don't have a men's team affiliated to them, who are relying purely on what they get through the leagues and what the FA can provide them, and the sponsorship from Barclays is another thing. So I'm interested to hear your opinion on this, because we've just said we need investment. We do need investment, but how much is too much? Jess, we'll start with you.
I did some digging into this actually, and I have concluded that I am simply torn, to be honest, because the reality is that until there is a big switch up, like Barry said, with money coming in from more sustainable sources, in which case we're probably talking like FA prize money, or FA giving boosts into leagues lower down, Premier League teams, Barclays, whoever, putting a cash injection into the league as a whole. The only way a team like London City Lionesses is ever going to kind of be able to keep up is with a private investor, and that is just the reality of it. At the end of the day, Kang, who is coming and owns like London City Lionesses now, she's still not going to have the same amount of money as Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, United, blah blah blah. So her aim, I would have thought, for the team would just be to at the minute stabilise them within the Championship and then potentially progress them into the WSL. But I have less beef, let's say, with her coming in and doing that than like sports washing, essentially what Newcastle are doing. I'll be completely honest. At the end of the day, she's a businesswoman. So if I just look at this as business for a second, which I don't really like to do, to be honest, because it's not, but it is. She obviously owns a couple of clubs already. She's seen London City as a good business opportunity, which actually, if you look at it, then yeah, potentially they are. They've not got any backing. If, like I said, if they don't get someone privately coming in and taking over them, they won't survive. If we're talking about other teams with men's affiliation growing, they will not survive, and that is the reality of it. Unless, again, going back to what Barry said, we get more cash injection from the men's side of things or from the governing bodies, which I just don't think is going to happen quick enough. So whilst I don't particularly like it, and I also am not really a big fan of these, like the multi-club ownership kind of things. You know, we've seen in the men's game what kind of dodgy dealings, let's say, can be done with them. I know there was a case where I think a random Belgian team bought a player because Lyon maybe had financial fair play restrictions, and then to the Belgian sister club bought this player for like 25 mil, smashed all records, and then loaned them straight to Lyon. That being said, that's a governing body problem. That's because no rules have been put in place to stop things like that. Because to me, that's essentially just cheating. But at the end of the day, they've not done anything illegal in that situation. But that's the kind of thing that I wouldn't want to see happen here. You know, what we don't want to see is London City basically become feeding grounds for the other clubs that she owns, because we see that a lot in the men's game. So I think overall at this stage, it's kind of too early to... I'm being oddly positive for this whole show. After spending the last show I did saying how pessimistic I am, I'm being weirdly optimistic. But yeah, I am going to hope that if this is done right, it might not be the worst thing in the world. And if you're a London City Lionesses fan, then this is fantastic. And like I say, based on what a lot of other clubs are doing and a lot of other club structures, I have less of a problem with this than I do many other things, to be honest.
I think this is a really important comment because last week we touched upon potentially the WSL expanding. And I think if clubs in the Championship are going to start fueling money into their teams, we're going to have to expand before there's a huge divide in the Championship. The Championship this year was unbelievable in quality. It was so competitive. It was so exciting to watch. And I think if we've got a handful of clubs, throwing money at their teams. Someone said something about Lewis, because obviously them coming back potentially into the Championship now, Reading have left. Those sorts of clubs, Durham, Lewis, brain's gone numb, who don't have that financial backing from the men's team. Meg, what's your opinion on all of this? Because I know Michelle Kang, she does own Washington Spirit, she does own Lyon. She has actually come out and said that she thinks that more people should start doing this multi-club ownership business. What's your opinion on that?
I mean, one thing that I definitely found interesting when I was sort of, looking up what Michelle Kang had been saying about London City Lionesses, she has said that she wants them to be the best team in England, which is a massive statement to make. Like, you've got your Arsenals, you've got your Chelseas, you've got your Man Cities, your Man Uniteds. I could go on for quite a while in terms of big clubs in, England, and you would not look at London City Lionesses as a big club in England. And will we ever? Well, she thinks we will, sort of thing. But as Jess was sort of saying, from a business side of things, she's seen this opportunity at London City Lionesses as a project to build on, which is, as a businesswoman or as a business person, you look for projects that you can build on, don't you? But she seems to be at the minute going the right way about it. You know, when Aslani walked in the in the conference room, people are going, "What the hell?" Like, this is London City Lionesses, and they've just signed the Swedish captain. Like, it was crazy, and it's still so weird to wrap your head around that a team that are in the championship, I think they finished 8th last season, if I'm correct, like, can sign a player like that. And I guess it's all good and well doing all that, but it's how sustainable that will then be. Like, you look at Newcastle, they've the Saudis took over, and massive cash injection. Maybe not the right way to go about it, but Newcastle women did do 2 back-to-back promotions, and no one batted an eyelid because they knew that the money was there, and whether that was the money that was invested in the players or the facilities or elsewhere, it worked. And Newcastle are bloody more than happy about that, because they will probably think, or they might end up in the WSL in the next couple of seasons, who knows. But you look at those 2 examples, and that they are very different, because Michelle Kanger's, she's come in, she already owns other clubs, so she kind of knows how they work and how football clubs are as a business. And she's already done so many positive things, and she only came in December. So if that can be sustainable, and if London City Lionesses end up getting promoted next season, then it's kind of worked out perfectly in a sense. But you also have to think, yes, they've signed Aslani on the pitch, but do you need to sign other world-class players to make that best team in England happen? Because essentially you're not going to be the best team in England unless you go on and win the WSL. Is like, what does she think that they're going to do to be branded the best team in England? Like, what does it mean to be the best team in England? That's an interesting question, because does it mean winning the WSL? Does it mean being it's an interesting question that maybe doesn't have an answer to it, or maybe everyone has a different answer to it, because it could mean winning things, it could be just being sustainable, who knows.
Yeah, Barry, finish us off with this. There's a lot of interesting points coming through here. I'm very interested to see what you've got to say about this.
Okay, right, round 2. Right, let's try and deal with the points that I wrote down first of all. So first of all, lots of people talking about just throwing money at it doesn't fix it. No, it doesn't. To be fair, I'm not convinced the WSL needs it. I would be inclined, if there was going to be money coming in from the Premier League, that money should be pushed into Tier 2 and below, with a sort of a staggered payment. So it would be obviously the highest amount probably. I mean, it will probably be for the Championship, but if I had my way, they'd give the most money to the Tier 6 teams, and then sort of make it smaller as you go up, because you need to build a firm foundation. It's not so much about just having a nice, it's a bit like a garden, isn't it? It's all very well and good having lovely flowers and everything like that, but if they've got no roots, they're just going to blow out with the wind. So ultimately, you need to have the foundations and the roots of your pyramid growing strong. Just imagine if the Egyptians had built their pyramid with no foundations. There'd be no one going to Egypt to go and visit that stuff, would they? Although they could have made a cat that had a slightly better face, because every time I see the Sphinx, I get a little bit scared. Just a little bit weird. But there we go. Not that it's a cat space, it's a human space. But I have digressed massively here, considering I was talking about money for the WSL and downwards. Welcome to my life. So that's the first thing. Money is important. What I find interesting, though, with your little quote that you put up there about, investment is fine when it's your team and it's not fair when it's others. That's life. I'm sorry, there's going to be too many people that just want everything to be fair and equal, but we're not starting on a level playing field. It's not what's happening here. And there is literally no way of that happening. Literally, the only way for that to happen would be to get rid of every single women's football team and just start them all again with none. It's a bit like when you're playing football at school and you're losing 5-0. at that point, you might just redistribute the teams and start all over again at 0-0. That's not going to happen here in the women's game, you know. So people say, well, how are Lewis supposed to? Well, they're not, like, unless they put money in. And that's, I mean, that's harsh and it might feel horrible, but that's kind of the way it is. Unless people invest and do their best to bring the clubs higher with them, it's just not going to happen. And it's sad. It's you know, it's the nature of the beast. You can't sit here on the one hand and say we want to have, you know, more money in the game, and then so everybody's got to have the same amount. It's not going to work, you know, and that unfortunately is life. You put another thing in there about the multi-club. No, I hate this idea. I hate the fact that Jim Ratcliffe can own a club abroad and he also owns this one. I hate the whole Red Bull thing. I just wish they would just go away and everything get taken over by Monster if we're going to have an energy drink, because I think it's absolutely ridiculous. You should own one club, because you have far too many ways of, and it will come out eventually at some point, somewhere down the line, there is going to be somebody who's going to have done something wrong because they've had too many clubs and they've not done the right thing. And I'm just going to sit there and go, oh, well, what a surprise that is. Imagine that, rich people funneling things into different places. Jimmy Carr got done for that, didn't he? So I just think people should really not allow these possible loopholes to exist, because you just know these people aren't rich because they are the nicest people in the world. It's because they can get the best advice possible to try and maximize their profits. So I absolutely hate the idea. People saying the WSL needs to be expanded. Currently, I mean, I was one of those last week that said yes, it should be. At this point, I'm not so sure, purely because yes, it's good if you get 2 more into the WSL, and that will put a lot more eyes on their product. But it's then about that second tier. And I think really that's the big problem that we're looking at here. The WSL is fine. The WSL is spot on. The WSL is like the Scottish Premier League. It's absolutely brilliant. It's there, it's sorted, and everybody knows what's going on. But you try naming any clubs outside of the Scottish Premier League and everybody goes, oh, what? Say, there's other leagues, because they're not quite so sure. And I think that's kind of where we are with this one. If you're going to start naming teams outside of the WSL, you end up with these positions where we've just seen a championship side go. And another really important thing to remember there is your fans and how big of a say they have. I said that there'd be no way of getting rid of Manchester United, for example, now, purely because there's too many fans. There'd be absolute uproar. It would go absolutely mad. There's too many people that are interested and invested now in that they wouldn't be able to row back on that even if they wanted to. But a club like Reading can, you know, yes, they allowed them to use the stadium and that was superb, but I mean, the stewarding in that place was not the most of ideal places you could go to. And I mean, their last season in the WSL wasn't the most ideal. You know, they were getting towards the end of the season from March onwards between 1,000 and 1,250. Their biggest attendance throughout the whole season was when Manchester United came to town and 5,000 people came through the gates. Arsenal were second with that with 3,660. Beyond that, they didn't get a single one over 2,000. There's not a lot of data as to how many they got while they were in the championship, but the only one I could see on the website that I've been looking on was 150 against Wolves. If you're only going to get 150 people through your doors whilst you're at the championship, what chance? So we can sit here and talk about all of these people above. Let me be absolutely frank and honest with you as well. The biggest place where you are going to ensure that you've got a women's football team that thrives and is worth keeping, for want of a nicer term, is to make sure you've got fans coming in. And that's the hard thing to do. You know, it's all very well and good trying to flirt with these people that have got all the money in the world and try and get them to give it to you. But ultimately, if you can get the fans in through the door and get them to love your team just like they love the men's team, a one club sort of approach with that, then I don't feel we have a problem in the game. So I kind of feel like, as much as I spoke about money in the last answer and even in this one a bit, actually it's looking at engaging with your fans. The fact that they went from having a lot more, it was clearly away fans that were coming through the gates. that was ensuring that Reading were able to continue operating at the level they were operating at. The minute they lost that, you just had a hardy bunch of a couple of hundred. And if you're just going to have a couple of hundred people, well, welcome to Tier 5 game, because that's roughly what you tend to get.
Wonderful. Okay, well, let's move away from Reading and the Championship, and let's talk about some issues that have arisen in the WSL. And thank God we've got two representatives on the panel who can give us their opinions about this, because it's been a strange couple of weeks for Manchester United. They have released a couple of their big players. Some we anticipated, some we didn't. They obviously have a new board, and previously Jim Ratcliffe had said that he has a plan for the women's team. The women's team have a brand new facility that they can call their own. We'll see how long that lasts. So yeah, let's talk about this in bits, because it's quite a hefty topic. Let's talk about Jim Ratcliffe's comments. He came out, he had an interview, and he said that essentially the women's team are TBC. They're not a priority of his. His main priority is to sort out the men's team. Now, I'd like to hear your opinions on this. I'm going to do Jess and Barry, and then I'm going to come to Meg for something different. So, you have these new owners that you've been craving for a long time. He comes in with a lot of money, says all the right things on paper, and then all of a sudden, your women's team that you care so deeply about is being thrown out of their facility to let the men take over whilst theirs is being sorted out. How do we feel about this? Let's start with Jess.
I love the way that you spoke about that then. Yeah, suddenly sports washing doesn't seem so bad, does it? No, seriously. I think it goes back to what we said at the very beginning. Like, we see progress, and then when you look a little bit deeper, it's like, oh, actually, there's still a lot of stuff that is the same as it has been for like my whole life. So like 20 years basically, which is a bit depressing. And I get to some extent what he's saying. He's coming as a new owner. The men's team is the team that makes the most amount of money. Fair. I will point out that the women's team year on year is making more and more money. You know, it's not this kind of like absolute blood-sucking entity that is bleeding the club dry. We are talking about, and I'm not saying this as a United fan, I'm saying this kind of like neutrally, they are, whatever way you want to look at it, whether you want to just look at it from like a business point of view, they are one of the biggest brands on this entire planet. You know, their fan base is ridiculous. You're talking like pushing 1 billion people probably. Not just in the UK, but like across the entire planet. They are massive. So for me, the whole like women's team TBC, it's not good enough. All right, fair dude, you didn't have the time. Hire someone else. Like, again, when I said first off about the Reading owner having PAs on PAs on PAs, get one of your PAs to hire someone else. Do you know what I mean? Like, do you know what? You don't have to deal with it directly. Because I can't imagine that he is slaving away every second of the day thinking about the men's team, to be honest. I doubt that he really gives a flying flip. So I just think like it's a cop-out. It really is a cop-out, because the men's team are obviously in a pickle, but they're not in a financial pickle particularly. They're just in a pickle that they're crap. Do you know what I mean? That's the problem. They're pretty rubbish. But he's already made the decision to keep on Ten Hag on the men's side of things. So, like, what more have you really got to look at the men's team? You've decided to overhaul the training complex. That's fine. Is Jim Ratcliffe going to be there at Carrington with a hammer, like doing some DIY? Somehow I doubt it. He's going to have outsourced that. So what's he doing with his time? Surely he's got a little bit of time just to ponder the women, or to look and find someone else to ponder the women. it's a cop-out. It really is for me. At the end of the day, like, the women's team are a first team. You know, I think it went to show towards the end of last season when they cancelled the awards night. That was for the whole club because the men were underperforming, essentially. And I'm not just peed off at that from the women's. I'm annoyed at that from the academy, like the lads' academy as well, because they did fantastically well. They won trophies, but the whole thing had to be cancelled and no one could get anything because the boys were playing a bit crap. So do you know what, Jim? Grow up. Just, I don't know, find some time. You know, manage your time better. Who was it that said about the 24 hours in a day? Molly May, is that her name? I'm really bad with those things, but she said that you've got 24 hours in a day. So do you know what, Jim? What are you doing with your 24 hours? I'm sure in some of that time, you could look at the women's team. Yeah, in conclusion, cop out. I don't really know if I have anything else to say. I'm just going to go on a bit of a rant, I think, if I carry on. I just don't think it's a good look, is it? You know, United is supposed to be pioneers, basically. I know we were late to the party forming a women's team, but if you, again, going off the global club image, what kind of global image does this give the rest of the world? Like, oh yeah, we've made a women's team because we basically had to, because it was a bit embarrassing that everyone else had a women's team and we didn't. So we've made one. And it's like, oh God, are you still here? Oh, right, okay. We've made you this new facilities, but actually the boys need it now, so off you pop. See you in a year. And that's basically all he's doing. And in a year's time, there'll be something else going on with the boys. And it'll be, oh, no, we can't look at them yet. X, Y, Z's happened. We've got to look at the management again. No, do it now. Don't palm it off. 24 hours. Go.
I think his 24 hours, Jess, by how he's talking, is he's spending every minute of those 24 on the men's team. That's exactly what he's doing.
Literally every second. When he's asleep, he is dreaming about them non-stop.
Absolutely. Can't get them out of his brain because they are his priority. Barry, moving on to you. Obviously, it's not a good look, but at the heart of this is a team who've just won their first major piece of silverware, who didn't have the best season, but come away with something. And it's just disheartening. What's your opinion on it? Tell us.
Well, I'm not the same as anybody else. So I spent the last couple of years wondering when it is I'm going to get cancelled. It feels like today might be the day. Because I fundamentally disagree with the vast majority of what's just been said. In the grand scheme of things, I know, and Jess is looking at me there. So there we go. It's been a pleasure knowing you all. Love you all lots. Shan't see you next week by the sounds of things. Listen, is it a good look? No, it's not. And is the language being used good? No, it isn't. If you had a boat that was sinking, you would go for the biggest hole first. You wouldn't sit there and go for where the little holes are. And the simple fact is that the biggest holes at Manchester United aren't on the pitch for the men or the women. It's behind the scenes. We've been talking about this for absolutely eons. The Glazers have absolutely butchered the football club of Manchester United. They have bled it to within an inch of its life. They've left it in more debt than we could have possibly been in. When you're watching the European Championships, and the first thing that's said on the telly when they see that terrible weather at Dortmund is, oh look, it's just like Old Trafford because of the way that the waterfalls are coming down, you understand the fact that the football club is a million miles worse off than anything that's going on the pitch. We won an FA Cup for the men and the women in spite of the ownership and the way that we are in. You want to talk about, people that are leaving the club. If we're to believe what's been said, Mark Skinner didn't even have a say in the fact that Katie Zellin wasn't offered a new contract. Now, if that's the case, that's absolutely mad. So what is happening at the moment is irrelevant in terms of on the pitch. What really, really, really matters here now, and I would say this across all football clubs, based on what we've just been talking about, is that you get your structure right. Now, Sir Jim Ratcliffe is not under any illusions. No, he's not spending 24 hours a day thinking about Man United because he's still got Leon to worry about. He's still got cycling and Ineos and all these other things to do. So Manchester United is not going to be the sole focus of his life. That's why he's going to employ people to do the job. Now, you look at the people at Manchester United that are going to do the job. You've got Omar Barada, not in position yet. Dan Ashworth, who's only just about coming over, and Jason Wilcox, who, let's be honest, doesn't seem like he's necessarily the most important person out of those three, but is at least in role. Now, they're going to have a list of things they need to do, whether that be sorting out the transfers, sorting out the structure for who actually deals with things. Polly Bancroft left. We only got an interim person in. We haven't, Matt Johnson, I think his name is. We don't have the structure for us to be worrying too much about anything else that's going on. The simple fact is that Man United, both on the men and the women's side, are not going to be necessarily a force for the next couple of years until they get the behind the scenes sorted out. You look at Arsenal, Arteta's only just about got to the point where they're challenging at the top of the table, and that's after 4 or 5 years of getting a structure right and setting up the way that they want to do things. For the women's side, same sort of thing. When was the last time that Arsenal truly challenged for the women's title? They didn't, because Chelsea have been running off. In fact, it was Man United with their absolutely shoddy behind the scenes stuff that's going on that managed to push Chelsea the closest, really, over the last couple of seasons. So I do think that we are in a very, very interesting situation. But I don't necessarily think the language that's being used is helping in terms of the women. I don't think he's inferred it, but he didn't say that the men's team are the priority. Equally, the club's been crying out for extra funding, for doing more and getting back to world-class facilities. He's just put £50 million into rebuilding Carrington for the men. The men have got to go somewhere. Now, I don't know where people are suggesting they go. Perhaps he wants them to go to David Lloyd. Perhaps they need to find some other gym. I don't know. But we've got to
go in the porter cabins, I'm just saying.
The men could go in the porter cabins, but it's just a place to get changed. Ultimately, the pitches that the women have been using all the time are still there. The nutritional facilities are still, and there's a big thing in that article that's mentioned that the reason they chose to keep the women in that position is so that they had the access to those things that otherwise they wouldn't have had, which would have been a more negative situation. I couldn't really care less who they put in there, and that changing in the porter cabins, having an office in a port, it's for a year. Like in a year's time, the women and the academy are going to have a £10 million complex that they can use. And by that point, we should have a structure behind the scenes that are in a much better situation. Just quickly to point on to what Sporty's put there. Jim's record for women's sport isn't great. Doesn't it concern me? It doesn't, because at the moment, we've just got to give them a chance. And I think the problem that the United fans have at the moment is nobody wants to give them a chance because they're all immediately everything. I hate it about the world today. I really do. Sometimes I just wish I could just turn off the world so that I didn't have to listen to people, because everybody wants it now. Amazon delivery now. If I can't have it now, next day delivery. Like, it's everything is now, and nobody's got any blinking patience anymore. Come back in 2 years' time, Mia, and if we're still in a situation where Sir Jim Ratcliffe is not paying attention to the women and Manchester United are not getting to a point where they are doing the right things, whether it be for the women's game or the men's, then we've got something to say. But I think right now, 6 months in, we don't even have the backroom staff where they need to be, I think is the situation. What I will just say to Emma as well, she's put the men's egos would never allow them to go into the porter cabins. This I do agree with. I agree with the fact that they put the women in there because the women are probably going to make less fuss, and even if they do, they don't really care because their contracts don't cost them very much. Bruno Fernandes or somebody like that getting changed in a porter cabin, getting paid ridiculous squillions per year, is much more likely to turn around and go, I ain't getting changed in that. And then there's problems, and then you have all of that. So for that, completely agree. I believe that it's only happened that way because the men, let's be honest, are more likely to whinge. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk, and I apologise if I've upset anybody.
All right, we'll book this in for 2 years in advance. In which case, Barry, okay, so put that in your calendar now. Meg, I'm gonna merge these two things together because not only has this been covered on AFU, all for United. So if you're interested in this, go and see their whole dedication video to Katie Zellum. But I'm gonna talk to you. I'm gonna ask your opinions on the release of Katie Zellum and Mackenzie Arnold. Now, I've put these two together because although Mackenzie Arnold wasn't the actual captain of West Ham, she was a stand-in. She was the captain this season. So those two clubs, West Ham and Manchester United, have lost their captains for free. What do you think about this?
I mean, it baffles me really. I mean, the fact that Barry's just said that Mark Skinner didn't even have a say in offering Zellum a new contract, it that makes me so angry because captains are not necessarily the best players in a team, but they're the player that you rely on. They're the leaders. You know, they know what to say in the harder times. You know, they bring teams together, and that's exactly what Zellum has done for however many years at United, and that's what Mackenzie Arnold has done this season at West Ham. And I look at Mackenzie Arnold, and obviously West Ham have not been nowhere near at it this season. Obviously, you can't really say they battled relegation because of the points gap between Bristol, who did get relegated, and then West Ham. But technically, they were in a relegation battle if you look at it in terms of yes, there's 12 teams, but they were the second team from bottom. So you do have to look at it in that sense. And I look at Mackenzie Arnold, and I think she's better than West Ham, like in a sense of, I think she could play at a much bigger club and do so well. So the fact that she's been there for however many, is it like four seasons or something? Like, she's been a great servant for a club that haven't been doing so well. And you look at Zellum, and she's also been an impeccable servant to a team who, yes, they've been doing well in some aspects, but overall, they haven't been doing well. And you just think, how can clubs let those sorts of people go so easily without almost, like, if I was, owner of Man U, I'd be like on my hands and knees begging Zellum to stay, like, regardless of whether she had been offered contracts from bigger clubs or, whether she just wanted to leave. I would be begging her to stay because of what she brings to that Man United team. Like, who captain? Obviously, there's been talks of who might captain next season, but they're not going to be anywhere near Katie Zellum. Like, when you think of Katie Zellum, you think of leadership. You just think of the person she was, especially off the pitch. And you obviously saw it when all the players were posting, when they saw that, when the announcement was made that she was leaving. And I looked at all their posts on Instagram, and, they said that she's going to be the biggest miss in the changing room. And it's not easy to replace people like that. Like, yes, you can maybe replace them on the pitch in terms of the quality or the technicality, etc., but you can't replace those people off the pitch. And those people are so important off the pitch because they're also very influential in, things other than just the football. Katie Zellum, would, voice her opinions on things, and so would Mackenzie Arnold. And it shouldn't be allowed that clubs can just let those sorts of players go for free, without even trying to keep them. And, wherever Zellum and Mackenzie Arnold go, those teams will be the luckiest teams in the world to have players like them. But for the WSL alone to, have them, off the books, if they do leave the WSL, like, it's, with Mary Earps going as well, that's not just a loss for Manchester United. These are losses for the WSL as a whole because of the impact that, they have at their clubs, but also on women's football as a whole. And as a fan, of neither team, it really does anger me. But, I look at Viv Miedema as an example. You know, she wasn't even the club captain, but you know, because of what she did for the club and women's football, that, you know, letting her go angered me. But these also anger me just as much because of the influence that they've had on the WSL and their teams. I could rant on about how angry it makes me that these players have been easily let go, with, you know, the fact that Mark Skinner might have not even had a say. But I won't go on anymore because I'll I'll rant.
Yeah, I do want to touch on West Ham because when they released yesterday, I think it was, who they were going to release at the end of the season, I saw a lot of Manchester United fans in the comments, and rightfully so, because West Ham released 4 to 5 of their starters, their starting lineup, just released for free, which I had to reread it a couple of times because you lose Mackenzie Arnold, who I have so much love for, and I said it on a tweet that I put out. I can't believe she even came to West Ham. West Ham is not a desirable club. Its location is poor. It doesn't have a great, like, facilities are horrendous. Even for the men, the facilities are horrendous. There's just not a lot going for them. So to bring her in the first place is crazy. She was the third best goalkeeper in the world in the FIFA Best Awards last year with Mary Earps and Katakol. I said this last week. That can't go unnoticed, and she played for West Ham, and that's huge. We also lost Hawa Sissoko, a massive, massive loss at the back. Risa Shimizu, who was, I think we nearly put in our mid-season team of the year. It's a mouthful. Emma Snurler, who was, again, another fantastic player when she got the opportunity. It just is really baffling me. And where Manchester United are letting these players go, and you anticipate they're going to buy pretty good players, they're going to bring some good players in, I just don't see that with West Ham. There's never been a vision for them. Famously, you can watch it back. There's a documentary where our chairman's son took on the sort of leadership of the women's team a few years ago just as a project, just to see if he could do it. It's never been taken seriously enough for me, and I think losing those kind of players is worrying. It's worrying. When you see stuff like what's happened with Reading, you just think maybe there's a chance that that could happen to West Ham. However, this is also true. You also have to have a relatively good coach, and I don't think that's really the case at West Ham. West Ham did announce a new keeper today. Apparently she's quite good. I don't watch the French league. She's signed from Reims. So that's going to be interesting. As I say, never heard of her. She's not going to get people through the door, I would argue. And I think that's the main difference between Manchester United and West Ham at the minute is United definitely have the pull. They have the pull factor. Despite all of this going on, as Jess said before, they are Manchester United. There's a massive, massive global brand behind them that's the pull, and we don't have that at West Ham. So it's going to be an interesting one to see. However, we're going to move on, and this is the last thing I want to talk about because I don't know if Freya's still in the chat. If she is, hey, we're going to do this right now. I'd like to talk about Alicia Lehmann to Juventus. Now, I'll give you some context before I ask for your opinions because I understand that this might not be massively mainstream. Alicia Lehmann. We all know Alicia Lehmann she is in the chat, hey, for many different reasons. Played for Aston Villa, used to play for West Ham, has also got quite a big social media following. For good or for bad, it's up to you to decide. However, her fiance, I think they're getting married, Douglas Luiz, who also plays for Aston Villa, has just completed a move to Juventus. And as far as I'm aware, in his clause, he asked for Lehmann to be transferred to the women's team if he was to come. So me and Freya have spoken for many hours about this and how we're just really riled up about it. She, as far as I'm aware, she's signed, put pen to paper. She will be announced soon. But my big problem here is the women's team at Juventus had no say in this transfer whatsoever. This was purely done by the board in the men's team. So how Juventus are going to use Alicia Lehmann next year is a different video in itself. I cannot even begin to get into this because it's frustrating me so much. Just another quick thing before I let you give your opinions on this. Women's football in Italy has its fair share of misogynists. Barry was saying earlier about the fact that Reading in the Championship, they were struggling to get bums on seats. They struggle to do that in Syria anyway. When you've got Juve Roma, it doesn't happen. The most exciting games of the year, they have hardly anyone there. There's a hell of a lot of misogynistic comments and people in Italy when it comes to women's football. So as much as I don't not rate Alicia Lehmann, I think she's an okay player. I don't think that this move does anything for her or for the team. And there is only one reason she's there, and it's because of Douglas Luiz. So, bringing Alicia Lehmann as what I would argue, I hope I'm not going too harsh here, a PR stunt. Is this the first move? Will this be the last move that we see of this? Jess, what's your opinions on this? This has blown my brains for weeks.
Firstly, I just want to say that I was laughing at Jess in the comments. Comment about men supporting women. That made me laugh because it's funny. I think Alicia Lehmann, and I will give her some kind of credit here in a roundabout way, but she has always been very good at, let's say, marketing herself. Take that as you will. We all know that women's football doesn't have a huge amount of money in it. My God, we've discussed that for half this show. So she has gone above and beyond to market the hell out of herself, and fair play. Same thing I said about Mary Earps on the AFU show. Get that bag, sis. You do you. But yes, I don't like this. I think if she had signed, and I'll be trying to be diplomatic again here, if they had, Juve women had signed her on her own merit, and if she was performing at the top of the game, but let's face it, she's been pretty average for the last couple of years. I don't know what they're going to do with her. You've already kind of touched on that, and like you said, it's a whole other thing. They have had this move forced upon them from the men's team, and I don't think it's inherently a bad thing. I think we kind of see it sometimes with WSL, not necessarily WSL players, but like women's players. If there's like a couple, they might move to the same area, but it doesn't seem to be as like fixed as this, like written in a contract kind of thing. So I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing in the world to keep couples together. That being said, you've got to have a need for both players. Both players have got to be fitting into their squad. It can't just be the man's going because the men's team want the man, and because the woman's pretty fit, let's face it, they're going to sign her as well. Because that's all she's going to be used for. That is all, I'm convinced that is all she's going to be used for. And that's probably just set women's rights back 50 years, to be honest. It's just bizarre. I hope we don't see more of it. I really do. Like I say, if it's merited, and that it's going to mean that people can, couples can stay together, whatever, if they're moving abroad, then great. But if it's a PR stunt and basically it's one of the partners using a contract as leverage essentially to get the other one over there, then no. Because at the end of the day, it should be football first. As far as I'm concerned, the football should always come first. If it follows up with good PR or good marketability for one of them, then great. I'm sure they'll both look gorgeous posing next to each other in next season's Juve kit. Can't wait to see the promos. Maybe in a few years' time, they'll have a little baby together and dress that in the Juve kit and have a whole family. Juve, I'm giving you ideas now, so I want some commission if you do that. So, yeah, that's kind of all I have to say on the matter. Not a fan, don't like it, just stinks, to be honest. Really does.
Yeah, there's a couple of comments that I just want to quickly go through. This one, of course, I think the overarching thing here is she is essentially being used as a clause in her boyfriend's deal. That's my problem. She is, footballs are they're all like commodities. You pay for them, you pay for their services. Juve women did not want her services. And this moves me on to this one, where she's not a bad footballer. She's definitely WSL quality footballer. But when Juventus last year, there was a 10-point gap between first and second place. Juve were 10 points behind Roma. They need high quality players, which they already have, and they have really great youth program and academy coming through. So for her to be sort of thrown into the mix, it's unfair on them too, who all go out on loan, come back with the hope that they can start for Juve next season, and then stuff like this happens. And then one more. This is fine, as Jess just said. I think the main problem here is if players are going to move to the same team or near each other, that's so different. It's the way that this one's being carried out that's like really pretty grim, that she's not. I mean, she definitely obviously wants to go, but it's the receiving side of Juve and now how they're going to try and get her in. Does she have any appearance clauses? Does she have any like bonuses that she needs to hit? It's all just crazy. Meg, I don't know if you've heard about this story. What do you think about it?
I think the first time I heard from it was you, Mia, because you're really into Italian football, and it just baffles me. Like Douglas Luiz, because Arsenal were linked with him, I think a couple of seasons ago, or whatever. He's a very good player, and obviously Juventus have looked at him at Aston Villa and gone, we need him. So in terms of that part of the signing, nothing wrong with that. The fact that he has then said, actually, I'm not coming to you unless you bring my girlfriend over or fiance or whatever, that just baffles me, because if he wants to do that for his move to Juventus, does that mean they move everywhere together for the rest of their career? Like, that is the baffling thing. Like, I understand it's moving to another country, and no one would ever want to move to another country and leave their other half behind, because it'd be really hard. But football as a job is, you have to sacrifice so much, and most players come out and say, what's the hardest thing about being a footballer? Sacrificing, and they say it's sacrificing, family time, etc., which is sort of, I guess family time, like, being in a couple. And whoever just brought up the Ericsson and Harder, yes, they're a couple, but that's a good example of Bayern clearly needed both players, and they are both very, very good, both probably world-class players that Bayern have, been crying out for, and they've done so well at Bayern. So if you look at this one, and it's a PR stunt, as you said. Unfortunately, I think when you do look at Alicia Lehmann, more people do know her not for her footballing ability. Like, it just has to be said, unfortunately, I don't think that's how most people look at her. It's not for her footballing ability. And, I've always thought she's an all right player. I've not looked at her and gone, oh my God, she's world class, or oh my God, I want her at Arsenal, or oh my God, she deserves to be at one of the top teams. But she's an all right player, as you said, she's WSL standard, and on her day for Aston Villa, she's unbelievable. But as you said, did Juventus need it? I was looking at their squad the other day and they've got like 9 forwards. Do you really need someone else? I mean, fair enough if they have gone to her and said, you know, we will play regularly. But as you've talked about, me, Juventus have got some quality players there. Probably, you know, more quality than Alicia Lehman has. And yeah, they probably do have some sort of like appearance, you know, or bonus, or it just baffles me. Like, if this is the way that transfers are going to go, I really hope this is the only transfer of this kind that happens, because it paints, well, obviously it paints Juve in a bad light to begin with, because what goes on behind the scenes to make them think, oh yeah, you know, we'll do that for Douglas Luiz. They're obviously really desperate for Douglas Luiz to be there. But it also shows that there's obviously not much communication between the men's and the women's team at Juventus. But also, yeah, it just paints a bad light on not necessarily women's football, but football as a whole. Like, if these start happening more often, I can't think of any examples of, you know, where it would happen, but that's not how football should go. A team should want a player purely for their footballing ability, and yeah, that's final.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is an interesting one as well. I didn't know this was the case, but again, this is fine if Brighton wanted her. It's not fine if they didn't have a say and she rocks up at the training ground. That's the difference. Barry, I'd quite like you to react to this comment if you don't mind. Obviously, your opinions on this appreciated, but also the dynamic. Like, Juve have a relatively young squad. There's a couple of older players in there that's just signed another 1-year deal, but the majority of these players need nurturing. And if you've got someone that's about to take your position, who the club didn't really want, what's that gonna do?
Emily knows that I love her, so I hope she doesn't say what I'm about to say the wrong way. But this part doesn't really bother me in the slightest. How the teammates choose to react, they need to be professional at the end of the day. From their point of view, if they want to get chosen, they'll get chosen by the merits, and the manager must make that decision. Unless, of course, there's something stupid in the clause that she must play. If that was to occur, then obviously this would then swing into place massively so, because nobody should be guaranteed a starting position or X number of games per season, especially not without having played for a particularly big club prior to that. There's so many avenues you could travel down this one. I had a little look just briefly whilst the girls were chatting about Instagram, because there are people mentioning that. And I looked at people like Mary Earps, Ella Toon, and Leslie Russo. They were the 3 that I just initially typed in, thinking lionesses, quite big names across the WSL, and none of them's got over 1 million. Alicia Lehman has 16.6 million Instagram followers, and Aston Villa as a club has got 3.9, which has made me giggle somewhat. So clearly, if you just get them for social media clout, that's not necessarily going to work, because Villa's is not there. Juventus, on the other hand, have got 60 million, so they are in a much better stratosphere in that respect. You know, I think this is a really interesting thing. I know that Jess, Blue Jess, not our Jess, has put on there about the men supporting women as a giggle. It's so tough. It really is. I mean, I appreciate on the previous answer I came across defending the board in the manner that I did, but nothing would please me more than if we immediately just went, look, here's 10 million quid, here's a brand new director of football for the women, here's a new structure and everything sorted. I just don't believe it's going to happen that quickly, and I'm willing to wait a year to sort of see what's happening with that, because of how poor it's been before. But I do think men need to support women, and I don't think this is the way that it should happen. And I think there are 101 different reasons as to why it shouldn't happen, but here's just two that I can think of immediately. The first thing, from what Emily said about what about the teammates? Well, what about Alicia Lehman? What happens if Douglas Louise and her break up? All of a sudden, where's the clout? Where's the ability then to go, don't you know my boyfriend is? Oh, look what's happened here. And the fact that that can even be a conversation, it doesn't belong in football. It belongs in Love Island, or First Dates, or all of that sort of absolute trash that's on the telly that I just can't be bothered to watch, because I effectively think it objectifies women. I don't like it. I hate it. I hate that that's the conversation that we're having now, that some man has just decided that he can use his girlfriend within that to either try and get her a position at a football club, or almost as leverage to get himself across there. So I hate that. But there's also a part of me, and I don't know because I'm not a woman, so I fully accept that what I'm about to say might be wrong also, and I'm willing to be told otherwise. But the respect that she's got for herself, why does she not want to try and get to the football club on her own merits and not have her partner, whoever that might be, doing the fighting? Well, there you go. And if that's what it's all about, Jess, if it's all about the washing of the hands with the mighty dollar bill, or the euro, as it would be in this case, I just don't think that's an acceptable way of doing it. You know, it makes a mockery of what hundreds of thousands of women beforehand and now are trying to do, which is to make it a serious sport. And the minute you do this, and by serious, I don't mean it never has been serious, but to be one that's taken seriously worldwide. And I'm not convinced that this sort of move is helpful in that respect.
Yeah, completely. And it's really, it feels like treading a really fine line of misogyny. Like, I don't want to be misogynistic towards her, because if that's something that she wants to do, that's something she wants to do. But it's really hard with the platform that she has, the way that she presents herself, and she's free to present herself as however she wants to. But when you go to a club like Juventus, in a league like Serie A, and you know that, and this is, I've started this from Freya because this is exactly my problem. You can bring people through the door, but you're bringing the wrong types of people through the door. If people were there for her playing ability, absolutely perfect. But 9 times out of 10, they're not. They're not. And that's why, Barry, she's got 16.6 million followers on Instagram. And that's the
Well, I
really...
knew that, but I thought I'd be the one to say that, so I'm glad you said it.
It is the really harsh truth of it. And then, you know, you said about Juventus being 60 million. That's the men's side. If you look at the women's side, it's going to be a couple 100,000, if that. So, yeah, it's a pretty grim one. That's going to happen. It's going to happen. And it's going to be an interesting season. See what happens. But, Barry, who's going to jump in there?
No, I was just thinking about you talking about that, and it's almost stereotypical. If you rewind 10 years ago, if you were a woman watching the men's football, that the conversation was always deemed to be, oh, he's got nice legs, hasn't he, and all that going on. And I just like how actually the conversation is changing now, and that more women are being celebrated for having an actual opinion that's based on what's going on in the football, and they're not just being treated as though women are only there to ogle the fact that there's men in shorts, and vice versa the other way around. But it does worry me, because men are just not as trustworthy as women when it comes to these sort of things. So that last message is just absolutely spot on. It's that horrible little line that needs to be trod all the way along. But yeah, that was all really. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a really pretty grim note to end on, but this hasn't been a show of sunshine and rainbows. It's the reality of women's football, and we're really feeling that over the last couple of weeks. But thank you for sticking with us. I know this has been a long show. Hopefully you found it quite engaging. Thanks for all of your comments. They've all been just brilliant. Really opened the chat up a bit. So anyway, we'll be back next week with another show. But until then, Thank you very much. Like, subscribe, do all of that stuff. Follow us all if you want to hear more from us. And we'll see you next Monday.